Hey guys, it's Anna, founder of Black Pod Collective and Black Pod Fest. And I'm here going live and taking over Afros and audio. And we're waiting for Kerry-Ann Brown, founder of Caribbean Podcast Directory, to go ahead and join us. So go ahead and come on in. Hey, long time no see. Go live podcast. How's everyone doing? I love that everyone is joining us. Come on in, come on in. Hey, Kerry-Ann. Hey, girl, hey. All right, so we want to give everyone a few minutes to go ahead and join us. It is exactly 8 o'clock. But while we do that, do you want to go ahead and introduce ourselves?
Yeah, I guess we could do that. I'm Kerry-Ann, founder of Caribbean Podcast Directory, and also the host of Carry On Friends, the Caribbean American podcast. And I'm also the founder of Breadfruit Media, a podcast production company. Yes, TF, Breadfruit in the house.
Hey everyone, my name is Anna Gogo, founder of Black Pod Collective as well as Black Pod Fest. I'm super excited to be here today with my good friend and accountability partner, Kerry-Ann Brown. So we're going to go ahead and give everybody some time to get trickled in. Please make sure you wave at us because this is my first live. If you guys only knew, we did a practice run on my private page. We've gone through all the things. I drank some wine. I've done all the things to mentally prepare for this. I've banned my mother upstairs. It's just everything has happened. So if you want to share some words of encouragement, I would greatly appreciate it. Kerry-Ann is a pro at this. So she's just ready to go. Oh, it's nothing. We'll be fine. And then she starts telling me about plugins I've never heard of before. And I'm like, you know what? We're not doing this.
Hey, Talib. Hi.
Hey, thank you for having us. So we're just going to go ahead and give everyone some time to get started. Hey, Ramona, the Jot Down podcast. Hey, Latrice. Hey,
Ramona. Hey, Latrice. We're doing great.
We're doing great. Okay, I like words of encouragement. It's my love language. So please keep that up. We have balance going here. I have wine and tea. You have to have balance.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good as is.
Kerry-Ann is I'm prepared. I don't need anything. All right. So I think we said we were going to give people probably to about 8:04. So about 2 more minutes to get joined in. Dames, hi. Thank you for joining. Hey, Mom. Thanks for joining.
Hi, Mom.
She's I want my hello too. But no, we're going to give, I think we got 1 more minute. We have 8 people joining us so far. So I'm super excited because Kerry-Ann and I are ready to just kind of talk about what's going on in the podcast industry thus far, what we really see going on today, what we see for the future, and just kind of taking you guys along that thought process with us.
Hey, Power Not Pity. Thanks for joining.
Hey, Black Women Stitch. Hey, girl. Hey, I love when members join. And is that Terrell? Okay, I think Terrell, that's you. T. Yeah. Connor, how are you? Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Black Pod Collective members in the building. Hey. Y'all can't see my T-shirt, but I'm representing.
We try.
We try. We do what we can. And as y'all know, red is my favorite color. So, yeah.
Hi,
hey,
girl.
Lit. Oh, that's
Growing light.
I'm going to let Kerry-Ann read versus me. All right.
Hey, poet, you're Jamaican. Welcome.
Okay. All right. It's happening. All right. Good to see you again as well.
Good to see you too.
I need just a Nigerian to join so we can have a Nigerian moment. But, anyway.
We family. So
I'm just saying. All right, so let's go ahead and dive on in. It's 8:04. We look forward to anyone else who's going to be joining us. We are really just going to be talking about, oh Lord, the Jamaicans are about to take over the whole chat. But we're going to be just talking about a few things. So first and foremost is where the industry is today. Kerry-Ann and I often have a lot of conversations around this. So this is really kind of giving you guys some insight view into some of our late night, early morning combos. So let's go ahead and dive on in. So first and foremost, honestly, we see the industry kind of today, networks being the big thing. As we know, Joe Budden has launched a podcast, if you didn't know that, as well as Charlemagne has launched a podcast network with iHeart. So we see so many networks coming out, not only just from indie podcasters and small creators, but also on a bigger scale. And we see companies wanting to kind of get behind that. So, Kerry-Ann, let's go ahead and dive on into that. Let's talk about it.
I think we first need to talk about what is a network and what isn't, because a lot of times I hear people throw around network and they'll say, oh, Breadfruit Media is a network. I'm like, no, it's a production company. I only own the shows that I personally agree with other creators that we are creating the show together. So I think the first thing is, what exactly is a network? A network is a group of shows typically coming together, typically owned by a centralized power. So typically with networks, the individual creators no longer own their shows. It's owned by the network creator. So I imagine maybe they work something out, unless for indie podcasters, there could be difference, but typically it's a central power that owns all the shows within the network. Would you agree?
I think it depends. So we're seeing a huge rate of podcast networks kind of coming out, and we're giving people a little bit more freedom. So what I mean by that is where you have negotiating rights with your contract. That gives you the ability to say, okay, yes, I want to still own my content. And what does this relationship look like? I think as podcast creators, we have to stop looking at it as other people are doing us favors when we're creating content and when we're putting information out there, because not just downloads, but the community you're creating, the engagement you have. And so I think we're seeing it shift a little bit away from it being where in the past, I feel like networks kind of came in, they owned your content, you lost all rights to it. And now you found yourself having to create from scratch if you decided to go your separate ways. Whereas now people have more of an opportunity to have those discussions up front and own it, because you can really create this on your own and build your own buzz. And a lot of people are learning how to be content creators on their own.
Right. So the point that you brought up is part of this discussion, right? When it comes to networks, you either have a central power owning your content and owning everything, or you have independent situations where you retain ownership and there's some other agreement. There's a contract negotiation in place. But network seems to be the flavor of the month right now. And networks. And not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's just evaluating whether the network is a right thing for you. So what do you think I'd love to hear, what are your pros for networks?
As you guys can tell, I took on the pros and she took on the cons. So I would say, honestly, the pros with networks is because, for me, it's all about the community aspect of it. And especially for solo podcasters, I honestly feel like having a network of people to kind of keep you accountable, keep you, true to your word, and having a contract in place saying that you are responsible for creating content can help with that. So I do find that to be a pro, especially in those moments where you might be feeling like, you know what, I don't feel like doing this right now. This is just not really my jazz this week, but you have that group that you can tap into. I know for a lot of people that's very important, so I would give that as a pro. Another pro would be the monetization opportunities. So you have some networks where they're able to kind of pull the collective numbers of all of the podcasters within that network and their downloads and offer that over to brands. So I think if a group of podcasters could maybe come together and own a network together, and they all really nobody owns anybody's shows, but they're really podcasts on either similar topics or within an umbrella of topics, it gives you more buying power. It gives you more authority with brands to be able to ask for more and take it that much further. So those would be my two biggest ones. I think there's others, but those two right there would be my top two. Actually, no, there's a third. I'm sorry. The third one, honestly, is for those networks that help with the production process. I know a lot of podcasters struggle with consistency, and because of the fact that sound engineering is just not their thing. And so a lot of people that I've spoken to, they talk about the fact that having to engineer their podcast when that's not really what they signed up for, it would take a huge burden off of them if they had an avenue to get away from. So I think those would be the top three pros. So accountability, somebody to engineer your content, and brand power to come together.
Okay. Those are good.
You're ready. Go ahead.
Good. I mean,
let me hear the cons.
No. Those are good reasons to create a network, right? But when you think of a network, and this is me, I'm the organizational, logical person. Why did you want to create a podcast? Did you create it as a creative outlet, right? So, you have two veins that we're running on: joining a network or starting a network. Starting a network is administrative hell, right? You got to deal with legalities, you got to deal with contracts, you have to deal with a lot of stuff. And if you are going to start a network, you then have to balance running a network and if you want to continue your show. And those two things are often going to collide. The other thing about network is, why do people join a network? What are you promising, or the incentive for people to join the network? If you're promising community and ads, you then have to think of, do you have the relationships, the network, and the infrastructure to support that? And so I'm kind of talking about this from the person who wants to create the network. You got to think about those things first, right? Mm-hmm. For me, I've worked over 12 years in the legal industry. For everything, I'm like, what's my liability? What's my exposure to these things, right? And that's like very important, not only as the network creator, but as the content creator. If I sign a contract, what is my exit strategy? What is their exit clause, right? What can I do to come out of this contract? And if I feel like this is worse than getting a divorce, I'm just not even going to consider it, right? That's just it. The other thing, if you are creating a network, you have to figure out what system you're going to put in place for revenue share, right? Revenue share. So let's say you and I are on a podcast network with two other shows, and we get, Jamaica, Nigeria brand over here to run ads on the show. How are you going to divide the revenue? Is it equally across all three shows? Is it based on which shows brings the most downloads? These are all different things that you have to consider when you are running a network. And I'm not saying it's impossible, but there has to be the systems in place to make sure that you are doing this, and you don't have people on your network accusing you of being unfair. It's not, whatever other reasons they'll, complain, and you will get complaints because as a manager, because that's what you're going to be, as a manager, you have the element of human resources, interactions with other people to deal with.
But let me just kind of throw this in there. How is this any different from any other business? Because I think as we're thinking of content creation, I think sometimes we forget about the business elements of being a content creator. So from what you're saying, this sounds very similar to your production house. You have to have systems in place. You have to have contracts in place. How does this differ from any other business that anybody would want to start and ensure that they are properly successful and those who get services are happy?
Because most of the conversations around network, most of the conversations around podcasts are never about the nitty gritty. It's always about the dollar signs and the nice glittery things. People talk about that. No one ever talks about like the back office and how crazy the back office looks like. The papers everywhere. It's crazy. And so because there's never enough conversations around that, that's kind of weird. I'm like, if your back office ain't right, this network is not going to last. Do you have a plan to scale to get staff? If you're sick, and you can't go out to build the networks and make money, or, you know, meet with advertisers, what's going to happen to other people on the show? You have to build in these contingency plan. I'm not sorry, guys. Again, I've worked in legal, so all I know and see are like liabilities, liabilities, liabilities. And so these are the things that I'm not necessarily saying networks are a bad thing, but the reason why you have iHeart and all these other people, they already have these built-in legal departments, built-in infrastructure to be able to roll these out. And even then, they have salespeople. They have a team of salespeople who know how to go out and get ads from different advertisers. So you want to think of yes, I was looking at a comment. You just kind of want to think about how are you setting yourself up for success. And if you want to start a network, you probably start small and then scale, but administratively, it could be a challenge.
So that takes us into our next piece of what does this mean for indie podcasters? So I've talked about like what some of these benefits are, and you've talked about some of the things that really people, I won't say cons, but things that people really need to think about. So I always love to like, as we kind of put things out there, let's talk through. Somebody asked the question of what does the back office look like? What are things to think about? What are those things that we need to make sure we're addressing? So as Kerry-Ann has just talked about legalities of all of this, I think unless you want to be personally sued and maybe you have buku money on your own, and if you do, hey, live your best life. But if that is not the case, protecting yourself. But also, and I struggle, and I know, Kerry-Ann, you're going to give me a look, so I'm not going to look at the phone, but finding a coach. Hold on when I say that, because I feel like everybody says that they can be a coach, but I always look at things from a perspective of who has built something that you can see for yourself and you see the results and you want to emulate that. Reaching out to those type of people, because everyone who calls themselves a coach is not someone you should be coached by, but instead looking at what their infrastructure is and learning those different nuances, putting systems in place, because I think oftentimes this is not just in podcasting, but just as Black entrepreneurs, sometimes we don't have a lot of systems and automations in place that our white counterparts do. And that's just the reality of the situation. And so recognizing whether that's a Dubsado, whether that's an Airtable, whether that's a Trello board, whatever that looks like, to make sure for every single portion of your business, because that's what this is. Let's be very clear. This is a business. Yes, we are content creators. Yes, yes, we are content creators. These comments are hard to not read as they come up. But yes, we are content creators. Yes, we are, innovators and everything like that. But that doesn't always mean that we're good on the business side of things. And so Kerry-Ann has been worked in the legal field. I've worked in healthcare for many years. And so it's always a balance to making sure, one, your systems are in place, but also your people skills. And if you don't have the people skills, bringing on those people who can actually have that front facing, because somebody who signed a contract with you who you're not meeting their needs, you need to have those conversations. And so Kerry-Ann, what type of advice would you say you have for anybody who's looking to start a network? And then we'll go into for anyone who's looking to join a network, because those are completely different things.
So the first thing, you start legally form a company. Regardless of whatever state you're in, you want to get legal advice, whether it's an LLC, an S Corp, whatever. You want to formalize a company. By formalizing a company, you have an EIN number, you create a bank account, you get with a lawyer to draft up standard operating contracts that you will need. That is bare minimum. That is what is going to insulate you. I have my kids' 529 accounts. I do not need anybody coming for me and my kids' college funds. These are like very basic protections that you need in place. So I would say that's the basic. As a matter of fact, getting comfortable about, contracts, right? So I remember, even last year I was talking, do you send guest agreements on a guest agreements to come on your podcast? If you are not comfortable doing that, then you are probably not ready to do a podcast network, because every conversation, every relationship is going to be governed by a contract, bottom line. And this is something you just got to be you're going to have to be comfortable with. A contract is a legally binding document. Without one, you leave it up to interpretation for a judge. Going to court in and of itself is an expensive venture. So you want to make sure that you have contracts in place, that what happens if we have a disagreement? Do you want to do mediation? Are we going to court? These are like, that's the bare minimum, I would say, when it comes to protecting yourself or starting a network. And then looking for other people who started a network that are Black creatives or indie creatives, and kind of ask them, you know, what things that they've learned. We don't have a lot of conversations about this. Like, what have you learned? What lessons do you think that I should, you know, be mindful of? And I think the biggest thing here is money and people. And if you, that whole thing, just like, how are you received? And then once you sort out the legal ramifications of like your company, then you have to deal with the financial, because now you're going to be dispersing money to people on your network. What's that system going to look like? The thought of that, just like a headache, just kind of shot up the back of my head, because I'm like, ooh, I got to be paying people. What does your financial system looks like? Because you don't ever want to be audited at any point, being IRS, right? And like just those basic information systems. Legally, how are you set up to operate as a company, and what does your financial system look like, especially as you have to disperse money to people for ads or whatever other reasons you have to pay people.
And so all of that is very well and true. And I know all of this can sound very much so like, okay, wait a minute, does this mean I need not to be doing this? No, it means first put the process in place. Because like, I know I'm the queen of, I'll have an idea and I'm like, oh, I'm ready. And then I need a person like Kerry-Ann who can be my accountability partner to be like, oh, have you done this, and this? And I'm like, okay, we'll launch that next year. I'm not ready for that this year. And so I think it's very important, because of the fact that I think sometimes as a society, or just as people in general, we have a tendency to not share information. I don't know if we see each other as competition or what the situation may be, but it's feeling comfortable to first ask. Because I know sometimes, like, the amount of people who probably asked me like, oh, Black Pod Collective, what goes into it? There hasn't been that many people, but I'm sure there's other people who probably want to create community. Kerry-Ann, one of the first conversations we had was me reaching out to say, hey, quick question. How did you do X, Y, and Z? She asked questions. I actually gave her like the nitty gritty of this is what I did. And then this is what I did. And here's the contact information for that. Because I'm a person, oftentimes, if you don't ask me, you'll never know. But as soon as you ask, I'm like, here's all of it. And so it's making sure that we first take that first step to ask people within our community, or that we just see doing really great things. I didn't charge her a consultation fee or anything like that. I definitely probably owe her some money, because she definitely gives me a lot of advice. And it goes both ways. And so this is not to discourage anybody, but it's also making sure we understand that as a creative, you need to have a business mindset, or have somebody on your team with a business mindset. I also think sometimes we tend to think of a team being where, oh, it has to be a group of paid people. I don't have resources for that. Everybody who currently works with Black Pod Collective, and there's about 7 people right now, none of them are paid, but they still reap great benefits. Like, some people have gotten sponsorships. Some people have gotten flown out to different states for different opportunities just from being a part of our organization. So you have to learn how to leverage what you do have to build that team, so that way you're not lacking in any capacity. So if you have someone who's really good at sponsorships, giving them 5%, 10% off of every contract that they bring in, that's an opportunity right there that does not cost you money. So just putting that out there before we dive into, okay, we've talked about this. Oh, go ahead, Kerry-Ann.
So that's one more thing I wanted to add, right? So if there are 3 things that you consider when you are thinking of you're starting a network or any business, you want the legal foundation of your business, you want the financial setup of your business, and then, you know, the hardest thing about running a business is building the team, because building a team requires chemistry, it's vetting people, and it's not as easy as it seems, but it's a very important process, because then you'll have founder burnout. Tennille, right now, Tennille's asking a question. No, it's working fine. It might freeze a little bit, but I think the live is working fine. Hey, so she was having issues with the live. Sorry.
My eyesight is not good at all.
Yeah, it's all
Um,
clear. All right. So sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'll read
but
for you, remember.
yeah. So let's go into this other element. So the other element, we've talked about those wanting to start a podcast network, because that's really where the industry is at today. So many, not only just on celebrity side, but I often see on Instagram, just so many people who reach out who are like, I'm starting a network. I would love to da, 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 da. And I'm that person who I fire off the questions like, okay, do you have this, and this, and then no response. So next thing, let's talk about for those wanting to join a network. We actually have an episode about this on the Black Pod Collective podcast, where someone talks through like when you recognize that you're ready to join a network and the different types of networks that exist. So I don't want to dive too much into that, but let's talk about like recognizing what we've talked about as the pros for networks, but how does this help you? One, two, what do you look for? So as we just talked about contracts and all of this information, I know that we sometimes tend to think we can do things on our own, but if you don't recognize or know legal jargon, it is important to get a lawyer. If nothing else, I can say that's by far the best decision I ever made, was getting a lawyer for Black Pod Collective, because people reached out to us for what seemed like amazing deals, and then in fine print, they're like, this says, and I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't know what those words meant. And so it's very important that you get a lawyer to, one, read through contracts for you, two, be able to negotiate back. I think one of the biggest things that we have to learn as people, regardless of race, gender, or anything else in between, is how to properly advocate for ourselves and know what we've truly built. I think sometimes when you're in the trenches of stuff, it's easy to just kind of feel like, I do not see an end to this and I need some help. This person is offering help, so I'm ready to give you everything. I want to use the Gimlet and what's going on with the nod as kind of an example of that, because as we can see, we now have people who are fighting for their content and fighting for what they built, mainly because of the fact that they have not taking the proper precautions, because I'm sure when they first built it, they did not think it would turn into what it is today. And so in everything, I always say, think of your show as being like a Joe Rogan. If your show became Joe Rogan, would you sign this contract? Would you be okay with what is being asked of you? Would this work out in your best interest? If the answer is no, then you should not be signing it. So whether it's $2, $200 million, you need to make sure that if you've decided to spend time and money, because podcasting can be cheap, but if you really want to take your show to that next level, not always the case. So what advice, Kerry-Ann, would you have, if any, for indie podcasters who are looking to join a network?
I think with anything is like, what are 3 things you really want to get out of a network? Like, why do I want a network? Oh, I want to grow my audience. Set your own personal benchmarks. I want to be able to expand my audience, grow my audience by 30%, by whatever percent. You have to set those benchmarks, because as with everything, you want to make sure you're evaluating your performance, the network's performance, because guess what? The network is evaluating your performance, right? So why top 3 things why you want to join this network. So examples: audience growth, revenue, any other benchmark. Make sure you set a percentage or a number, and you want to keep track of that, because if the network is not meeting that, then it's probably not working out. And best believe, on the flip side, they're evaluating your performance, because the whole point of you being part of the network is for you to bring value to a portfolio. And if you're not bringing that value, then they may just say, you know what, you are no longer a fit for the network. So, and however that looks like in contract terms. But I would say just set goals, personal goals and benchmarks of what you want to get out of the network. And you are doing that evaluation, whether quarterly, every 6 months, depending on the length of your contract. I hope the contract isn't for more than a year, but anyway, every 3 months, or every month. You want to evaluate every 2 months, whatever frequency you choose to evaluate. What kind of transparency are they offering? How is your show performing against all the other shows on the network? Is that something that they'll provide you? Because that's important. Because if you're outperforming the other shows on the network, then you may want to renegotiate some of the terms of that contract. So just those are just some of the things that I would say. Just, what level of transparency in terms of stats and data, because that's the other thing. If you join a network, chances are you cannot keep your own podcast hosting account. you will most likely have to join their podcast hosting account, and you may or may not have certain insights to the data that you would be accustomed to if you were paying for your own hosting account.
All right. So that takes us to our next thing. So we've talked about where the industry is today. Now we're going to talk about where the industry is going to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm super excited about this one because of the fact that I've been doing a lot of research into this. So where the industry is going. So I think right now, apps to diversify. Oh, go ahead.
Before we switch, Latrice's asking, do you have to pay to join a network? I hope not.
It depends. There are some networks that do require payment. So it all depends on, so it all depends on which network you're joining.
Ones for sure.
Not just business ones. There's some that require, so there's some that require payment as it relates to your operating costs is what they call it. Mm-hmm, so they have like fees that you pay into it. Now, what I always tell people, if you're joining a network that requires payment, you need to get a breakdown of what that looks like. What is going to advertising? What is going to, whether it's our hosting platform, what is going towards branding, what is going to sound engineering? You need to ask for like an itemized bill of what is going into each item so that way you are fully aware, and it's just not blanketly it's $200 a month, but you don't actually know where your resources are being allocated to. And you also need to then request that on the back end. So if you tell me this is what it's going to, you need to then show me where it actually went. So I'm a big firm believer of, if you're a part of a group of people where it's like, okay, this is what your money is for, I need to then see the proof behind the pudding. So if I'm not seeing any difference in branding, I'm not seeing any difference in advertising, then that doesn't really add up. But most networks do not have a cost. There are actually some networks that will pay you to be a part of their network, but then they 100% own your content. They 100% own the direction of the show. You are more so of a hired host.
You're right. So you're an employee.
You're an employee. You don't really get much say. Like I know somebody who works for a brand who they are a host and they get paid and everything like that per episode. It's not per downloads or anything like that. But at the same token, they also have to be very mindful about certain things that they say. They sometimes have to be pulled back in to re-record because of the fact that they've said something that does not align with the company as a whole. So just those are things to keep in mind, but there are networks out there that exist that way.
Yeah. And for those scenarios, they also could terminate terminate without cause, right? They could end the relationship. And depending on some networks or brands, you want to be careful because they may have like a period by which you can be a host of another show. So they may have a grace period before you can be hired to host another show. So those are some things to consider.
Yeah, so you have to be careful with that, because even with starting your own podcast, so whether it's host of another show for another brand, no, they mean like for you yourself to create your own branded podcast, your own show, you can be limited in that because of the fact that you are now seen as a personality for their brand, and they don't, and for them, and so they don't want you to kind of veer off of that. Kerry-Ann, I cannot see that to save my life.
No, I'm going to read it. So, Power to Pity. What would it look like to have a decentralized structure for creating a podcast network? Something like a collective where everyone own parts of a business. Is that something you've seen? So I can answer that question. Yes. So last year at Podcast Movement, there's a group of people that I like. They're called Multitude, and they're a collective. And actually, they've talked about this. You know, a collective is a more looser structure. And in actuality, most people really want to do a collective and not a network, which is why we started out trying to define what a network is. So a collective is where, okay, there's a group of us, so power, not pity, you know, me, Anna, we're all in a collective. You know, I'm the one who's always looking over the contracts. Anna is like, all right, branding. Power to Pity is like, yo, we getting all the hype creative stuff. Everyone is kind of pulling their own weights as part of the collective. They bring a particular skill or expertise to the group, and they're responsible for that for the entire group. So whether it's marketing, whether it's branding, all of that, you know, it's that. So yes, I like Multitude. They're a good example of what a collective is. Everyone kind of has different skills and they do that. So I think when people think of network, they may not be thinking of network the way iHeart and Gimlet and others operate. They're thinking more loosely as a collective. And I think the issue with the nomenclature, the naming is where people get tripped up. And I think it's very important. That's why we wanted to level set at the beginning what a network is. So a collective, absolutely decentralized, but they're, even with a network, even with a collective, contracts need to be in place. Power to pity. Miss Kerry-Ann over here don't operate without any agreement whatsoever. I appeared on Black Pod Collective. You best believe I signed a release. All right.
Everybody who appears on Black Pod Collective signs a release.
I know that, but I didn't want it to seem like because we're friends that I'm exempt for that. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, if you're a business, you're a business. Not because we're friends, you're exempt from signing agreements. So even with a collective, you want to have some agreement in place. I'm the founder of my collective in all intents and purposes, but I have agreement with individual creators and it's different. It could be the same, but it could be different. But you want to make sure you have agreements in place, because just like a network, someone may want to leave a collective. What does that separation in the relationship look like? So yeah. I hope I answered that question. Power, not pity. What's going on, Jamaica state of mind? I'm just bigging up my people.
Oh, Lord. Anyway, moving on to our next topic at hand before the Jamaicans take over the conversation. Where do we see the industry going? So we talked about where the industry is today, which really is, as we know, industry changes on a daily basis at this point. So networks seem to be the big thing right now. So we'll answer any questions kind of like a little further down. So we want to make sure we leave time to get through the whole conversation. So where is the industry going? So right now, one of the big things is looking at ways to diversify monetization. And, you know, for a very long time, it's been really about brands and sponsorship and getting your download numbers up so that way you can reach out to more sponsors, doing this, doing that. I mean, pretty much like bending over backwards, it's been about numbers. Well, that's recently changed. We're now seeing an influx, and I don't like to talk about any brands or apps because if you're not paying me, I'm not talking about you. And so with that in mind, we're not going to kind of talk about any specific apps, but I want to say in my research I've done, it's about 8 apps in total that have really launched in this year alone. And so a lot of these things are speaking towards monetization that doesn't have anything to do with sponsorship, but is more about getting your listeners to invest in you. So we want to use some of our time to kind of talk through what that looks like and what that means for us as indie podcasters and where that's going, because instead of twiddling your thumb, because some of us are micro influencers, that's really what it boils down to. Within our own industry, we're micro influencers. Something I can even say for
nano influencers.
Oh, yes. Something I can even say for Black Pod Collective is our audience is Black podcasters. Our downloads are well up there with everyone else. But in the same token, what I found is a lot of brands, their target audience don't look like us. And that's just the truth of the situation. A lot of times our community, we're still on Anchor, which I'm not going to go there because I have a whole rant I could go through. But a lot of our community is still on Anchor. And sometimes that's not looked at as being as serious, not as invested, those type of things. And so it's not as easy to get that brand sponsorship because they don't look at our audience as people who are going to invest that money in building their content. So it's looking at strategic ways and moving away from waiting for brands to invest in us, and instead for us to start investing in our own communities. So these apps that exist, I know there's several. I'm going to bring up the popular one because everybody talks about it. It's Patreon. And I think it all depends what your audience wants. I know Patreon is very big on what you have to give your audience in return, those type of things. But let's really talk through this. Because I know some people who create extra content. Hold on, girl. Hold on. I got to say it. I know you're waiting to get tapped in. Just give me a second. I'm going to tap you in a second. But Patreon and all of these other platforms that ask for you to create extra content for your community. and or your audience, because I call it community because that's what I've built. But for a lot of people, it's your listeners. So you're now having to create additional content or figure out what you're giving your audience. And so let's talk through, one, the different strategies, but two, what this means for us as content creators as we see the industry kind of moving away. Because a lot of these brands, I think it said, $1 billion is going to be spent. I need to start seeing more data and more numbers on what these people look like that you're spending $1 billion on, because they don't look like us. Like, let's just be realistic to what it is. Or if they do, they're just not my skin tone. But, just a little bit lighter. No offense to light skinned folks. No jabs at anybody who's light skinned. But let's just call it what it is. Kerry-Ann is taking notes because that means she's about to touch on every point I just put out there. And I got to be ready because I feel like she's about to come for me. But in the same token, I think it's very important for us to step away from this notion of I need to basically sell my soul, sell my brand to all of these people who just want pieces of it, but they're not really invested in our community, and start looking at how the community can give back in, how we as content creators can tap back in. Membership to Black Pod Collective is $5 a month. I have a lot of people who tell me I need to go up on the price because of the fact that we give a lot of value, like between workshops and everything else. But on a monthly basis, you would be surprised how many people come back and they're like, oh, I'm paying $5. I can't get more.
Girl, can you tap me in, girl? All right. Woo! So,
tap in.
Yes. So power, not pity. Everybody, just look for my drop from a clip from the panel on International Podcast Day to talk about Patreon and all the things. I'll be transparent. I didn't use Patreon, but I've tried glow.fm. I'm just gonna do that. I still have the account, and I think I got one person who supported me on Glow. What is happening here is that Patreon works for that demographic. For Black folk, for Caribbean folk, for African folk, it don't work the same way. And I think the bigger problem, which is why I'm going to say the census is important. And when you fill out the census, you also should indicate where you identify. So I identify as a Jamaican American. You probably Nigerian American. Why? Because when they see Black people, they pull us all into one group. Nothing is wrong with that. But there are nuances in how our group operates, right? And because they're not able to drill down data. You notice, like, when it comes to Caucasians and everyone else, you could drill down to nitty gritty. When it comes to Black people, they treat us as a monolith, right? So they don't really have a lot of data. So that's why they throw a lot of stuff at us. And we're like, this don't make sense, right? And the data is based on what they get from the majority Caucasian audience on Patreon who happily support, whereas our audience consumes content differently and support people differently. So that's one. Census is important because that's how data is going to be. We can use data because of Black folk. The other thing is brand spending. I think that number is from an advertising standpoint. It's not for us, so to speak, right? And again, the brands that are spending for ads are the ones with the most discretionary revenue to decide that they want to allocate. What is the right way to monetize? Again, monetization looks very differently, so not because someone is reading a host read ad, that means that's the only way to monetize. The challenge is that the marketing around monetization is from a tech standpoint. A tech startup, when they talk about tech startups and valuation, they talk about money. What podcasting, it's like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? You have to have the content. Good content then invites, hopefully, advertising, right? So no one ever talks about podcasting from a content perspective, but from like that money, which is more like a tech perspective. So then we all get caught up in this advertising, we should make money. And this is the one way that it's shoved down our throat that we need to make money. And as a result, we don't take enough time to understand our audience, understand how they, their behaviors, what they like, and try to figure out how to monetize in that way. So after 5 years, I can confidently say, like, yeah, Caribbean people don't do that. Nope, I'm not going to do that on Kerry-Ann Friends because nope, that's not how we operate. And that
But
it's your audience. So you should be able to have
but
some kind of confidence there. Go ahead.
you might be able to say that for your audience of Caribbeans, because I know there's probably other people who've been able to monetize in some capacity. I know we had somebody
Yes.
who left a comment. I can't see very well, but I think what I saw was that she's on Patreon and her people, they like to give her money, and Patreon is how they do it. And so it's one of those things of, I want to make sure that we're not saying blanket statements, because the fact that there
Right.
are going to be instances that are going to be different.
Right.
But what we are talking about is those instances of recognizing that, one, before we start talking about monetization and how we make money, you need to first make sure you can answer the basics
The
of who
basic
is your
question.
audience. What do they enjoy doing? Where do they spend their time? What do they want to invest in? If you're not able to answer those questions just yet, then you're not able to even start fathoming investing in anything or any brand or anything of that nature. Oftentimes, I think we don't talk too much about like the other streamlines. So as we talked about where the industry is going, I think the industry is moving away from brands really being the ones to invest in you, but instead having where your audience invests in you, where you invest in yourself. Because I always tell people this, I need to see what you've done for yourself before you start looking to me
Traction.
to start helping you. So what traction have you had? Along with that is looking at whether it's merchandise, whether it could be journals, whether it could be a book list, whether it could be t-shirts, having merch for yourself so that way you're able to even start that process and look at what that overhead. There's so many things that drop ship for you these days where you don't have to hold inventory and you're easily making money readily based off of, like, you could have a slogan or something that's set on your platform. Instead of everybody worrying about brands advertising with you, start off with, what does my audience even like? What are things that they will actually invest their time and their money in? And once you learn those things, you can sell somebody anything, and you don't really need a brand to get behind you. You can actually get through that on your own and take your audience on this journey with you. Because with content creation, people are moving away from looking at you as, oh, you're the source of knowledge, but they're really tying into your personality. Like, I've listened to
Yeah.
podcasts before and I'm like, you are dry. You're not for me. And so you have to recognize, if people are supporting you on your journey, then they're going to invest in things that you ask of them because of the fact that they support you as the individual. Go ahead, Kerry-Ann.
Yes. The other thing I wanted to say that, with monetization, it's like, don't always look like the podcast itself is the monetization vehicle, right? It is not just that. Dallin said this on the replay of the Caribbean podcast panel on International Podcast Day. Your podcast is your business card. It's your calling card. So your business may not be
Not your
selling
moneymaker.
it's not necessarily your moneymaker. It could be, like you said, your personalities. It could be a gateway for something totally not related to a podcast. So one podcaster that is on Caribbean Podcast Directory, she does a lot of arts and creative stuff through her. That's what she was known for. So you get to know her better. That's a business outside of podcasting, but because you get to know her, you want to be able to say, oh, what is she doing? What is she about? So your podcast is a way of indirectly or directly telling people about what you do outside of the podcast. So the podcast itself doesn't necessarily have to be your business. As a matter of fact, I'm not going to say a blanket statement like Anna said, but the podcast itself may not be the business itself. The podcast itself may not be the business. For me, it's a little different. Podcasting or production is my business, but not the actual Carry-On Friends podcast itself. And I could use myself as an example. And I had to get real confident and comfortable in saying that, because people will tell you, this is how you should do it. And especially if you're in a super niche audience, it could be very hard. And you feel like, oh my gosh, they might be right. But if you're in a niche and you know your niche, and like Anna said, you have the data, you know who your audience is, you understand their habits, then that's who your peoples are, right? And you could just stand on that, because there's something for somebody. So
And so that ties into my last point as it relates to where the industry is going.
And then we
I
need to
think
get some
for
questions.
Yes, I think for our community, where the industry is really going is where your podcast, as Kerry-Ann said, is your business card. Your podcast gives insight into what you as the individual specializes in, what you and the individual does. So if you decide to create a business after the fact, that's perfectly fine. So if you already have an area where it's like you enjoy talking about this, you can consult on it, you can possibly do this for clients. Your podcast can be a way for people to see your expertise. So whether that's with Black Pod Collective, the podcast, we have different people who are sharing insight. That shows community, but also shows my producing skills, because the fact that everything from picking who speaks to editing, the whole show production really is me. And so you want to look at how you can position yourself within the space and then go from there. So let's go ahead and answer some quick questions before we close out.
Any questions?
Yes. I think we answered the questions as we went, I think. If there's any questions that we have missed, please type them below. While you're doing that, we're going to go ahead and start our closeout statement.
Yeah. The other thing that a podcast does, in one sense, you could talk about your business, but in another sense, it could show your personality, right? So depending on the type of business you have, you may not get to see the CEO or get to know them as a person. So it works in the reverse as well. Know more about the business or know more about the people in the business behind the scenes.
All right, so let's go ahead and close out. While we're closing out, if you have any questions or anything like that, please put it in the comment. If we don't get to it, by all means, please feel free to reach out to us on our personal brands. I'm Black Pod Collective, which is BLKPOD Collective. Kerry-Ann is
Caribbean Podcast.
All right, so just to close out, just some things that we have in the future. So Black Pod Collective, we have membership, and we offer everything from making sure we're able to support you through your process. We are a collective of people who are here to really support each other. We have monthly workshops from everything to podcast legalities, talking about repurposing content, marketing and audience engagement. We talk about a gambit of things. We also have monthly member meetups, as well as a directory that gets a little bit over 5,000 views a month. So we're really all about community, education, and visibility to help you take your brand to that next level. Kerry-Ann?
Yes. So founder of Caribbean Podcast Directory. If you are of Caribbean heritage and you have not joined the directory, you should. It's free. The goal of the directory is to give visibility of content creators who have Caribbean heritage. And we have a meetup coming up on October 22nd. I'll be sharing that information on social shortly. And it's really good to really build community as a Caribbean podcaster. You have unique sets of needs, and we talk about that. So it would be good to be part of a community where you could talk about the more nuanced aspects of things. Anna, and I think our questions are coming in too. So.
Yeah, so I'm going to close out with our last thing, and then we're going to answer those questions in these last 8 minutes. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this conversation with me and Kerry-Ann, this is actually something we do quite a bit. We'll be launching a Pods Den, which is coming in January 2021. It's pretty much industry insights, news, and discussions about podcasting. Right now, there's Pod News and all of these other avenues that talk about podcasting from a white male perspective. And we're going to be bringing you the real conversations from our perspective as Black women within the industry, as Black producers, as Black people creating communities. So stay tuned for that. It's called a Pods Den, and it's going to be brought to you guys in January 2021. We're super excited about that, because this is honestly, this that you just saw is really our conversations that happen on a regular basis. You're just getting to watch, and probably less yelling at each other. So let's go ahead and take some of these questions.
So Power Not Pity asks, what are some good questions to ask when you are reaching out to people who are creating networks? I really think that depends on what you specifically want to ask. I think when you want to know who's right, your goal is, and I typically would say just ask a very general question and listen, and then keep asking, and then what, and then what, and then what, so I would just open more generally with a question.
To add to that, I would actually also say, see what they have formalized that they send to you. I'm very big on, like, if I'm reaching out to someone and I have questions, if you send me a nice document that is like it has like literally all of the things about you, that says to me that you're well organized and you're serious about this. And so making sure, whether it's a website, whether it's, whatever document that they send, that it is formalized somewhere and it's not just like it changes with the wind every time you talk to somebody.
So the next question is Black Women Stitch. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. What ways can you get your audience to financially invest in you beyond Patreon? Do you recommend drop shipped merch? The first thing I would say before I answer that question, survey your audience. If you are not surveying your audience, I cannot answer that question. Ask them that question. Would they be interested? And if they would be, you test out a few things. Maybe they don't want drop shipped items. Maybe they want something else. But you need to kind of ask them that question.
Seeing that you're a member of Black Pod Collective, I know your podcast and I know your platform and your audience. Yes, for you, I would 100% say go for that, because your audience is super, 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 super invested in you. I know you've received grants and all of these other things. Dropship merch is your next best thing, because of the fact that you create, like, I know your audience wants to see the things that you create. I want to say there was like some socks or something that you showed us and I was like, shoot, how can I buy that? So I definitely think either dropship merch, but because of the fact that you literally sew things,
yeah,
I think you need to be sending those things yourself.
So
and then that way you can up the cost for it. So with drop shipping, you're having to pay them some of that. If you have Etsy or some other avenue where you've created yourself, it's your design, it's something that is very specific, and you can even create to where it's only one of a kind, I think that will do amazingly for you, because I think you've posted some stuff that I'm like, hey girl, how do I get that? So most definitely for you.
Yeah. Any other question before we get kicked off?
I know we did good. We got 5 minutes. But no, thank you guys so much for joining us. Like, where can I replay this live? Yeah, you can actually replay it on Afros and Audio. I think they're going to have it as an IGTV. Yeah. So you're going to be able to play it there, and you can definitely, anything that you may have missed. I'm planning a podcast at this time. Ooh, I'm excited. Go ahead and join Black Pod Collective.
Yes,
okay,
Carrie-Ann. Trini Mike is Caribbean. We having a meetup. I'm telling you, we're having a meetup on the 22nd. Make sure you just join and you could ask questions. How do you sell something if what you offer is a community space? I don't think we'll have enough time to answer that question, because that's more nuanced. I'd want to know what community space specifically.
And what do you offer in your space?
Yeah.
Like when you say community space, I'm assuming like a co-working type situation. So there's a lot of options there. So if you're like offering event space or anything like that, that's going to be a little hard to answer, because there's so many options you can go there.
Yeah. The replay will also be in YouTube in 24 hours, according to Talib. So as always, just connect with us at Caribbean Podcast or Black Pop Collective. Black
and keep in mind, yes, Black is BLK. Don't forget, we also have Black Pod Fest, which is a podcast festival for Black podcasters. We will be, this year we did it online. Next year we will be going live. So we look forward to hopefully seeing you guys there. I will charge my members about, thank you. Share as much as you can. We really appreciate it.
We appreciate it.
Shoot us a DM, shoot us an email. You can reach me at hello@blkpodcollective.com. Carrie-Ann?
Carrie at CaribbeanPodcastDirectory.com. Very long, but just to the point. We had a lot of fun talking with you. It was great. Maybe we should do this again soon, but a Podsden, we'll be doing that.
Oh, yes. A Podsden will definitely be happening, but it's making me wonder if we should have like a video component to a Podsden, but I don't know. Don't look at me like that, okay?
Do you see my face? Like, what?
I put it out there. That's all that matters. Will you be speaking?
And Anna will be speaking at Afros and Audio.
Carrie-Ann, girl, I got this.
Oh, you said you couldn't read. Didn't we agree that I was?
I saw my name. I was like, wait, I think I see that one. But no, so I will be speaking at Afros and Audio. I will be moderating the closing panel, I believe, which is talking about the state of Black podcasts. I'm super excited about that because I've been doing some research around it. I'm a researcher by nature, so I love kind of digging in. So I'm excited to kind of ask some of these hard-hitting questions for our audience. It is 2 minutes, and like literally this screen changed for me on my end, so I think that's its way of telling me that we are all done. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Look forward to welcoming you to the collective.
Bye.
Bye.